Welcome to Space to Lead, the podcast where leaders and teams come together to learn, grow, and thrive. Each episode brings fresh insights and real conversations with leaders and industry experts who are shaping the future of leadership. We explore strategies to build dynamic, engaging cultures, whether you're leading from the front or making an impact within your team. So take a deep breath, make some space, and let's lead together.
Thank you for tuning into Space to Lead. I am your host, David LeBlanc, and today I'm very excited to have Linh Nguyen joining us. Linh is a self-worth and leadership coach. She is an author, and she is the founder of The Wise Heart. Linh, it's so good to have you here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is really fun and exciting. I've been listening to your podcast, and I really like what you've been doing.
Oh, thank you very much. I have to say, I'm having a lot of fun, and I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah. So we've had some good conversations, and I've really been looking forward to spending some time with you today, because I know oftentimes when we're working with leaders, this idea of self-awareness, self-leadership is something that comes up a lot. And I know this is really important in your work. And also you shared you have a bit of a journey or a story as well. So I would love to spend some time just exploring and learning a little bit more about that.
Okay, yeah, we can talk about my journey. I started in business management and then it became business development. And I was sort of managing a day spa for 13 years. I started when I was 27 years old. At 27, I thought I knew so much. And, my life was kind of in ruins at the time, and I really poured myself into my work. And years would go by, and it took a long time before one of the staff members said something it kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. And she said, I've never worked for anyone who made me feel so stupid. And it was almost like it took the wind out of me, right? And I sat there, and this whole time, years had gone by, and I thought that I was just such an effective and a thoughtful manager. And nobody taught me to manage. I was the firstborn in my family. I was somebody who was always quite independent, and I just figured, okay, well, we transfer all those skills and we take them into management. It makes sense, right? And when she said that to me, I remember we were sitting at a white spot, and she was right across from me, and I didn't quite know how to respond to that. My ego was like, oh, well, I think I came up with some like BS response to it. But I went home and I really thought about it, and it made me rethink my approach to management. And I realized so much of the way that I carried myself as a manager was due to my inability to lead my own life in other aspects. So whether it was my finances or my family or my personal relationships, I didn't quite have a hold of those. And so I projected everything into my work and onto my staff. And so it really helped me to self-reflect and take a look at what I could do better. And it took several years. And then I went to counseling school, and then I really uncovered where all of that was coming from. And it made me realize that there's so many people in leadership positions similar to the position that I was in. We just had no clue how to do it without harming the people that were invested in us and into the businesses that we were running. And there was a lot of work that needed to be done from the self point of view. And that's sort of where I began, and that was where my journey really started to take flight.
Wow. And I have to say, when you shared that statement from your coworker, my heart just sort of went into my throat.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy to hear something like that. But more importantly, it's not easy to do what you did and actually turn it into something versus, retreating and hiding.
Right.
Where did you start?
Well, like I said, I started with some retaliating statement, kind of like, well, if you were doing a good job, then you I wouldn't have, and then once my ego was satisfied with that statement, I really then said, okay, what kind of a leader do I really want to be remembered as? Like, what kind of impact do I actually want to make? And why am I doing the things that I'm doing if it's not resonating with people the way that I imagine it would? And so I kind of started with that, and I really then started reviewing my at the time I was reviewing my relationship with my ex-husband. I was really looking at my relationship with my siblings and my parents and my friends. So then I just started asking everybody, what's your point of view of me? Right? It was pretty unanimous. Like, one thing I have to say is if you're going to go onto this journey, you have to be ready to take the hits, because I was like, ooh. And it was unanimous. The word intimidating came up a lot. The word very strong-minded and stubborn, and all of these descriptors came up, and I thought, holy cow, my intention for pouring myself into the people in front of me was to be helpful.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was to be effective. It was to build profits for the company. It was to help people build their careers and feel more empowered. And it was really, they were performing. I ran a tight ship and things were in working order, but people weren't fulfilled and they weren't happy. And that mattered to me. And I don't think that I knew up until that point that it mattered. So much of what I was doing was just based on like this survival and making sure that we produce, that we bring out results, that we really look at the outcome. But the process was completely irrelevant at the time. And when that work presented itself to me, that inner work, then I really thought, okay, well, what's the point of getting to the destination if we hated the ride the whole time? Nobody's going to go on it again.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Up until that point, before this realization hit you, were you enjoying the ride?
Whoa, good question. Hmm. I think that I understood why the ride had to be turbulent. And so a big part of me thrived on the turbulence of the ride. I
Hmm.
don't think that I ever truly enjoyed it though. There was always this sense of duty and obligation and self-sacrifice and all of the things that go into taking on a leadership position, right? It's a huge sense of responsibility, and you like to tell yourself, or that's I liked to tell myself that it was necessary. Somebody had to be the bad guy. Somebody had to do the tough work, and somebody had to make the sacrifices. And if they didn't see the value in that, that's their problem. So I didn't feel appreciated. I didn't feel validated in what I was doing. So I don't think that I really enjoyed it at all.
Mm. I'm not sure if this is your experience, but I found in talking to a lot of leaders, they're on the hamster wheel. I don't love that expression, but I'll use
Mm,
it today. They're on the hamster wheel. It's go, go, go. They feel they need to do this, they need to move things forward, and they actually don't slow down enough to actually realize I'm not enjoying this.
that's right. It's that performative approach, right? There's like that one song, oh God, I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically like that, like the dancing monkey. We're just standing there, we're just performing, you know? And you know what your role is, and you know what the purpose of it is, and it does serve a purpose in the grand scheme of whatever business or relationship there is, but it doesn't serve to create connection, which ultimately is what we all want, I think. We just don't know how to do it any other way, because like you said, we're just on this metaphorical hamster wheel, and we're if I stop, what happens? I don't know, I'm scared. So I just keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up connection because I think I'm hearing from your story right from the beginning, your intention was to create connection, to build relationships. And then this realization happened that your impact was something very different.
Hmm. That's right.
So when you talk about this idea of building connection, how do you do that today?
Hmm. So the first thing is I always ask the person in front of me what their intention is for being in that same space. So if I'm working with leaders, if I'm working with managers, if I'm working with, just somebody who's trying to get control over their life, I ask them what they're doing it for. What is their
Mhm.
intention for seeking out the work and the help and the professional perspectives? so that I can ensure that I'm doing it in a way that's comfortable for them, in a way that makes sense for them, and it's not just me projecting what I think that they need.
Hmm.
So that's where I usually start.
Beautiful, beautiful. So you're
Hmm.
creating this space. I'm curious
Mm.
because I also heard in your story that you were good at your job way back then. You were effective, you got things done, your team was successful. So you're now in this place where you're creating this space, you're creating more room for others, what's important to them, but you also want to be effective.
Hmm.
So how do you keep that drive and that momentum that you had historically in this new version of Lynn?
Yeah. There, what I've learned on this journey of leadership is that people are motivated either through fear or through inspiration, right? And fear really worked. It did its job. The intimidation was
You are
very
very
effective.
scary, I have to say. No, I'm teasing.
Right. Yeah. And so back then it was one of those things. If I just flexed that intimidation muscle a little bit, it would get things done, and it would get things done quite quickly. But it also always drained me because it created this foundation where I had to always check in and I always had to micromanage because I didn't, where there's fear, there's mistrust. So I wasn't trusting the people that I was working with to be able to perform and do their jobs the way that I trained them to do it. Right. And ultimately, knowing what I know now, I'm like, oh, I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust myself that I did a good enough job or that I offered enough information. And so I was always eavesdropping on what they were doing and making sure that they didn't say the right thing to that client or whatever it was. And I would intervene and I would hijack every possible opportunity there was for somebody to really shine. And you should have done this instead. Like 9 out of 10, let's focus on the one thing that we were missing. Now, when I'm working with people, I am still quite effective, but it comes from a place where they are self-motivated, self-led. And it takes longer. That's the truth. And I think part of that is what happens in a lot of businesses where we look at in the moment how much extra energy and extra time you have to really invest into the people that are there for you and really establish that foundation of trust and capability, competency, all of those things. And if you can really spend that extra time in the beginning, later on down the road, you have that freedom to just sit back and say, okay, I trust that I did a good job and I trust in the people that I have recruited or hired or, the people that have come to me. It does take longer, but the effectiveness is still the same without you having that sense of mistrust.
Mm, so true. I often say that when I'm working either with individuals or with a team, is that to really do this work, initially it's going to require more effort, more time. And you can't see because this is a podcast, but I'm doing this with my hand where that effort curve goes quite high sometimes.
Yes,
And then as things start, that solid foundation that you talked about is built, things settle in, then your job does get easier.
that's right.
What I really loved about what you shared, and here's sort of what I heard if I put it into my own words, is in this new style of leadership, that journey that you went through, but also this style of leadership that you work with your clients on, what I'm really hearing is this idea of sharing responsibility.
Hmm.
It's not just your responsibility as a leader to make sure everything's on track, on target, micromanaging, checking in. It's our responsibility. And if we both feel ownership in that, we tend to be more successful. So this idea of shared responsibility really is coming up for me in what you just said.
I love that. And I think the word that stands out for me is ownership. Ownership is such a big piece because I think a lot of times when people are part of a team, they don't feel a sense of ownership. There's somebody when there's a lack of leadership, people don't really know what to do. They don't really know what they're allowed to do. They don't take ownership of their strengths or their skills or their mistakes. And so they're really, it's a, it's a sinking ship.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, I think that that's a great word. I also recall, that person who said to me that she never felt so dumb. We're friends. We're friends. And we revisit that moment We've revisited that moment a few times in the last decade. Where she worked after, she said, there was a lot of things that stayed with me when I worked with you. A lot of things that traumatized me, but a lot of things that stayed with me that I found quite useful. And in the news space, the manager was completely opposite from you. She actually was so uninvolved. She didn't invest any time into, getting to know us or asking any questions. And even if you asked us questions and you never followed through with it, I still felt like when I left there and I went to this new place, I still owned the skills that I acquired there. Those were mine. And I could use them in whatever way I felt was beneficial. And I thought, yeah, that's true. If we don't have a sense of ownership, then what are we here for?
Yeah.
It's just to serve constantly. And I think there is power in serving others. But if we don't do it from a place of connected purpose, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
So true. So true. This idea of ownership, I think it's a great place to kind of see where we wrap up this conversation. I know we could probably talk for the next hour, but just, in being conscious of time, I'd love to ask you two questions around this sense of ownership. If I'm a leader, first question, if I'm a leader and this conversation resonates with me and I'm starting to think about how do I start to create that type of space? What's the first step to help share that ownership or responsibility?
Oh, that's a good question. I have to think on that for a second here. What's a good place to start? I think owning the things that I do know and the things that I don't know is a place that I would personally start. There's so many things as leaders that we don't know. And somehow many of us will go into a situation thinking we have to have all the answers. And even like this podcast, for example, I was like, I don't know what we're really going to talk about, right? And I was like, how do I prepare for that? And I realize it's a conversation and it has to be really authentic. And what I know is that I know what my journey is and I know what my purpose is for having conversations like this. It's to not only share a piece of me, but hopefully there's one person listening who says, okay, yeah, I get that. That was also something that I kind of went through, right? So that I own that. I own my story and I own the things that I went through, but I also own not knowing what's next. I also own, having limited information on how it's going to impact other people. And at some point, I have to be okay with that. So that's probably where I would start with that.
And I love that. And again, a whole conversation we could have right there because the minute I hear about what do I own and what do I know, what do I not know, I start thinking about things like self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and all the stuff that comes up when I have to let go of this idea that I need to know everything. Thank you for that. The second part to this question, and this is going to be a bit of a trick one, and to your point about preparing for the conversation, no prep. This is all
Yeah.
just open dialogue. Flipping the script, if I'm an employee and I'm working for a leader who maybe doesn't believe in shared ownership, what's one thing I could do as an employee to try and open up that space or that conversation with my leader?
Mm. When I think about being an employee, part of it is I don't think that it's any different. I think that again, it's understanding what I know and what I don't know and going in there. So there's this thing that I do with my clients. Okay. So we have three things that we walk through. The first door we walk through is what do I think I know? Those are the assumptions. So we often go through these stories in our head before we approach somebody, or when we're in a situation that feels out of our control, we'll go through this whole plethora of assumptions, accusations or judgments against the other person or about the situation. Once I've flushed that out, I go to the next thing and I say, what do I know for sure? Right. So maybe what I know for sure is that I don't know anything about this leader or this manager or this owner. Maybe what I know for sure is that I am feeling intimidated or that I'm feeling inadequate. I know for sure that they haven't assigned me anything that makes sense to my skill set, whatever it is. So I look at the observables, the things that I can, if this was a court of law, this is the facts that I can prove. Right. And then the final thing I would do is based on my assumptions, based on the things that I think I know, the stories I've created, I create a list of things that I need to know. What do I need to know in order to connect with this person and connect with this role that I'm in? Then I have to figure out who I go to ask. those questions of. So whether you're a leader or whether you're an employee, those are the three things that I would always encourage people to lean into, because the stories are the things that disconnect us from people. It's the assumptions. And then there's the evidence that's in front of us that really can help us to secure it. And what that might look like is to say, okay, I'm noticing that I'm feeling a little intimidated in this situation. And part of it is because I'm assuming that maybe you don't trust what I can bring to the table. So I guess I should ask you then, what do you need at the table? What's missing?
Beautiful. I love that. And it really speaks to this idea, when there's assumptions and stories and narratives in our head, there's all this noise and it's hard to see past it. So this process that you introduced, it gets it in front of you. And when it's in front of you, it gives you the ability to be more strategic and intentional about how you handle that noise. And I love the question, how you framed all of that into that one beautiful question at the end, which has the potential, whether I'm a leader or an employee, to open up the space, to open up for different dialogue. So
yes,
love that.
absolutely. And
Love that.
I also think it ties into that first question about ownership, right? Like I have to own the stories that I'm creating in my head. I have to own the assumptions and the judgments that I'm projecting outwardly. And because if I don't take ownership of those things, we cannot connect. We cannot be productive. There's the level of effectiveness that we show up with other people really it's diminished. Yeah. And also I think when we talk about ownership is like owning our values. One other thing that I usually talk to people about is I can't predict how you will respond to me. I can't predict how a customer or an owner or a coworker will respond to me, right? And so I can be anxious about that all day long. I can second guess myself. I can second guess and question their competence, and it does nothing for productivity. It does nothing for that. What I can take ownership over is like, okay, I don't know if I can trust you to do your job, and I don't know if I can trust you to follow through. I don't know if I can trust you to support me when I need it. But what I can trust for certain is that if all hell breaks loose and if things just fall to shit, I trust myself to be able to manage what's in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And that will allow me to give you the grace and the space to do what you need to do. Right? So it's kind of like raising kids. Leadership is very similar to that, where we're like, well, I don't know. I'm just going to do my best and provide what I can and give the directives. And then we got to just wait and see how that turns out.
Yeah. Yeah. So it ties to that idea of ownership, of taking responsibility for ourselves, and exactly how we started the conversation, this idea of self-leadership
You got it.
and taking responsibility and making those choices for ourselves versus letting the system, the noise, make those choices for us. Lynn, thank you so much for creating the space. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I feel like there's probably 10 different things we touched on that each could be a conversation on their own. So I'm hoping that we get to do something like this soon.
Oh, I would love that.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Space to Lead. If you enjoyed the conversation with Lynn, you can learn more about her work online at www.thewiseheart.ca or on Instagram at @thewiseheart. And if you're curious to check out her new book, it's available on Amazon. Self-Reckoning, Embracing the Journey Beyond 40 and Divorce. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if this resonated with you, share it with a friend or colleague. Let's grow this community of leaders who create space for reflection, clarity, and impact. Do you know someone who's a great leader with a story to share? We'd love to hear from them. Send us your guest recommendations, and let's keep the conversation going and learning together. Until next time, keep leading with intention.